Hello and welcome to Audiobook Connection, behind the scenes with the creative teams. I'm Becky Parker Geist and I'm your host. Audiobook Connection is your place to learn about the audiobook creative process in discussions between the authors, narrators, producers, and post-production teams that bring them all together, as well as guests who have listened to the audiobooks and have questions for the creative teams. This podcast is sponsored by Pro Audio Voices, helping great stories come alive through audiobook production and marketing. Hi, I'm Becky Parker Geist. I am the host of the Audiobook Connection podcast, Behind the Scenes with the Creative Teams. I'm also president of Bay Area Independent Publishers Association and the CEO of Pro Audio Voices, providing audiobook and podcast production, distribution, and marketing. And today I have with me Gary F. Bengier, author of Unfettered Journey and Journey to 2125, One Century, One Family, Rising to Challenges. Welcome, Gary.
Well, it's great to see you again, Becky. And by the way, I really appreciate working with you and Pro Audio Voices. You guys did a great job on my first book, Unfettered Journey. And now we're soon going to be back to this prequel book, Journey to 2125. So looking forward to getting that out to the audience because I think we've got a great group of voice actors, just fabulous voices there to do this. So
Absolutely.
Anyway, that's glad to see you again.
Thank you. And yeah, we're going to jump into more about that a little further on into this. But let's start off kind of at the beginning for those who haven't gotten to know you at all yet. Tell us a little bit about kind of your background. What got you started on your publishing journey?
Well, I've actually had a very different career before taking up this sort of hobby and avocation of writing. So I did 25 years plus in tech. I was in Silicon Valley in a variety of technologies, everything from biosciences for half a dozen years to computer peripherals, to electronic design automation, that's chip design, to video over the internet, high-tech windmills, and then ultimately eBay and the internet. And I was where I was CFO at eBay. I took them public just over 20 some years ago. So I had a long tech career. And then after that, I decided to do some of the things that I had not had time to do for all those years. And so I basically went back to school, backfilled an astrophysics degree. Then I got interested in philosophy and I backfilled a philosophy degree. And then after those couple of undergraduate degrees, actually, getting into the details, I finished a master's in philosophy focused on philosophy of mind. So that's a sort of a convoluted path to where I got to. And I was very interested in some ideas in philosophy of mind, thinking about consciousness and what is consciousness. And then doing some writing in philosophy for that, very narrow academic field, very small audience. And I decided some of these ideas were very important. And so I wrote a novel, first novel, Unfettered Journey, in 2020. It was released.
I can see why, because knowing your work, I can see how all of those components have fit together into this work that you're now creating. And it's sort of like having your fingers and your thoughts in the future and where we're going and how that all might play out. So pretty exciting. And I'm curious, like now having really shifted so dramatically in your career, if you're, from all of that tech into writing, what's one of the things that you are now most enjoying about writing?
There's a certain tremendous creativity about the process of learning to write fiction. How do you write characters? How do you tell stories? And so all that's just been a journey for me too. And so that's been just a lot of fun. I hadn't expected it to be so enjoyable when I started. As I said, I started with desire to get some of these ideas about consciousness out into the world. And so that was the reason I tried to write the first book, Unfettered Journey. And I felt that the way to make some of those ideas more approachable was to do it through character. So, and that's a book where the main character is an AI scientist named Joe, whose job it is to create robot consciousness. And he does not believe he can do it. And so he embarks on a journey to try to find out what consciousness really is. That's how the book starts. And that book takes place well into the future in the year 2161. And the reason for that is that two reasons. The reason I focused on that is because consciousness at the time I was writing was also bringing up the topic of consciousness and AIs and robots. And that was part of the common conversation. And everyone thinks about Terminator, and they think about these crazy, dangerous AIs, and there's a belief that they could be conscious pretty soon. And the philosophers of mind tend to think that's a little bit far-fetched. While there's still a lot of debate, I think there's a strong group that would say that we don't even know what consciousness is. And so consciousness that resembles human consciousness is unlikely to be exhibited in AIs anytime soon. So I'm going to get that idea out. That was the basis. And I placed that book far enough in the future where I think that at some point it's highly likely that we will have robots walking around among us. And at least there'll be a tendency to think that they're sort of conscious, because we will tend to anthropomorphize the machine, right? That's just how it will work.
Yeah.
And so that will be part of our experience. And so that's why that book takes place about roughly 140 years in the future. So that was my project. And then I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed the part about writing characters, and I love my characters. I've got some great characters that I think people fell in love with. And that book won 14 book awards. So I was very pleased with it. And it came out in the middle of COVID, which didn't help because all the bookstores were closed. But it did quite well. So, and that was my only book. I thought I was done with the project. I had no interest in writing another fiction book because it's a lot of work. So so what happened? Well,
here you are with book 2.
Yes, I truly thought I was done. And I thought I was done, and then a couple of things changed. One was that when I was thinking about what happened with the reception, a lot of my fans actually said, this is very realistic. It's eerily authentic, according to She Single magazine. And some of the fans were writing me and say, well, what happened before that, 2161? How'd we get there? and so,
right, they want to know.
And so, but I still was not. I was quite reluctant to do anything. And then there were a couple of important ideas that I realized that were part of the conversation in the general public, and that I had some strong opinions about, and I wanted to get those ideas out to join that conversation. And in particularly, one was sort of a negative. There was a particular book that really annoyed me because I thought that the science was bad, and in the Unfettered Journey and in this current book, Journey to 2125, they are both a hard science approach to the future, speculative fiction. None of us knows what will happen. The world itself is a complex system, and nonlinear things happen all the time. So that said, though, I think what you can do with knowing enough about enough technologies is you can do perhaps a better job of thinking about how some of the technologies will spin out into the future. So those couple of reasons, then I was started by writing sort of a response to the one book that annoyed me, and then that turned into a chapter, and then that turned into some characters, and then I had a lot of fun with the characters. I think the characters in Journey to 2125 are even more approachable. The first book, Unfettered Journey is more philosophical, and that has perhaps a narrower audience than this book. But this book really sets forth, I think, a quite realistic future with the big asterisks that it's nonlinear and none of us know what's going to happen tomorrow. I mean, who knew how the election that just happened would have turned out, right?
I know. Right. Oh, yeah. And of course, I'm a big fan of Unfettered Journey. So I'm curious now, when you were writing Unfettered Journey, did you kind of map out in your own mind or on paper the path that now you have written into 2125? Because you had, when you look at where we went to, I'm thinking that did you map out the technologies and their development so that you kind of landed in what seemed like a logical place?
Well, there's maybe I'll answer that in two parts.
Okay, great.
Because I never planned to write another book, writing the prequel had its own issues, because to actually do that, then the two books sort of have to fit together. And that's very hard. It's sort of, you've got this one piece that's set and the other piece has to fit. And so that by itself was actually a very enjoyable puzzle to do, to figure out how it would work. And I think for anyone who's read either book, and when you read either book, there are actually, I'll tell you, there are Easter eggs hidden in each direction. You could read Unfettered Journey first, and when you read Journey to 2125, you'll discover Easter eggs and vice versa. But that was a very challenging endeavor, because I hadn't mapped them out that way. In terms of the technology, what I did do, though, is, as I said, when I wrote Unfettered Journey, I could take some long trends and say it's highly likely. So I do think, let's just talk about robots and AIs. And by the way, Unfettered Journey, of course, was written before the ChatGPT moment, which is now 2 years ago. But it seemed to me highly likely that at some point, robots will be walking around among us. I mean, science fiction writers like Isaac Asimov have been writing about that and predicting it for 100 years. And it should have already happened according to them. But we've seen the Boston Dynamics, the robots throwing free throws from the center of court, and the robots are getting better. And Bill Gates, there's a couple videos on YouTube where he's talking about a handful of robot companies that are doing very well. So there's a lot of progress. I think that they will take longer to be ubiquitous than many think, because they're heavy. We need some material science to make them lighter. They're expensive. They'll show up in factories and such places earlier. They'll show up in what are called closed domains, where you can have a simpler problem to solve. So, for example, in Journey to 2125, I have a quick reference to a scene where a character, Jack, is driving down the road, riding in the autonomous car, and he sees a garbage truck. And the garbage truck is all autonomous, and it's picking up garbage. And, we know what the garbage trucks look like today, and you have a person who loads the containers. Well, that's done autonomously. But if someone left their container too far away, there's a robot on the back bumper, and it unloads itself, and it gets the container and unloads it. So I would consider that a closed domain. So in other words, you can figure out how to solve that problem within certain constraints, and you can imagine that happening by some time. And that happens in the book around 2040. So, something like that is, I think, highly reasonable. The challenge, though, for the technology is, whereas it's easier to do the long term and say it's highly likely that robots will be walking around in 140 to 200 years. But what happens next decade? It's very hard to do this. So it's actually more of a challenge to think near term how the technology will evolve. And so that was a lot of fun to kind of think through that, because again, I think a lot of people in Silicon Valley don't do a very good job of that. Okay. So you take what's the story from Silicon Valley? There's either, as I describe it, the Silicon Bro, trust us, all this technology is doing great, and it's all going to arrive tomorrow. Okay. It's all going to be utopian.
Right.
Or on the other side, there's a whole genre in science fiction of dystopian and sci-fi, right? The robots are going to kill us. Right. It's the end of the world. So, Journey to 2125, I think I would say it's hopeful, somewhat hopeful at the end, but it takes a belief, which I do think is more likely, that it's somewhere in between. It's the answer. No, they're not all going to kill us. Humans will muddle through somehow, but it's going to be a challenging 100 years.
Yeah. And we may not want them jump straight into having them care for the those who are vulnerable.
Well, that's right. There'll be a lot of challenges that way. In fact, I think that the unknown unknowns are what will be the challenge. I think we will find that autonomous cars are going to kill people, right? Planes that are flown by more and more autonomous systems, eventually without any pilots, some of them will crash, right? There'll be lots of adjustments, and it's very hard to predict this stuff. So, yeah.
Right. The idea of the perfect machine, of a machine being able to be perfect just because it is a machine, I think there is a kind of mythical fallacy that happens in our minds around that. We think, well, it's a machine. It should be doing the right, it should be work perfectly. And yet our experience doesn't tell us that. It's somehow we concoct this idea because we want it to be that way, I guess.
Well, and let me just dive deep on one of the technologies, just because AI is obviously front and center now. By the way, and that made it quite difficult to try to think through what will happen in the next 10 or 20 years, because there's a wide divergence of opinions on that. I mean, there are those, and you can pick the half dozen largest AI companies. So we've had over $100 billion worth of investment in the last 2 years. And there's a lot of hype going on. And, their valuations of those companies are based upon them reaching some of those goals. OpenAI and some of its leaders have talked about AGI, that's artificial general intelligence. That's a machine, an AI that is superior to humans in across the board, that has general intelligence. And there are predictions that that'll be around in a few years. And that's an example where I definitely disagree. I think that a practical, economic, artificial general intelligence is quite a bit further out, and I'll asterisk what that means in just a moment. But I think that there's a lot of hype about this technology, and we have to be thoughtful about how it will really play out. So, as an example, I'm a friend of mine, Melanie Mitchell at the Santa Fe Institute. She spent over 35 years in artificial intelligence research. She's got a book called Artificial Intelligence for Thinking Humans, which I'd recommend. And she is more on the negative side. And because she's had a career that's gone through 2 or 3 AI winters where there's been a lot of hype, and then it's been shown to be not quite as successful as they thought. And here's one of the reasons why I think for AI, and you're thinking of these large learning models, these LLMs, and the transformer models, the GPT, the T and transformer and GPT, those technologies, they're fundamentally different than other computer code that we have experience with. You think about how a computer works. Most people think about the code that is always right. To your comment, it's symbolic code. I mean, I wrote that kind of code when I started my career. I have an undergraduate in computer science way back when, and decision theory, but it does work perfectly, right? You run the program and it works exactly right. These LLMs have a very different fundamental architecture. What they do is the models have an and because they're trained on data, what they do mathematically is they explore an enormous high dimensional space. We're talking about 800 billion to a trillion dimensions in these last generation of models. So, of course, you can't get your head around more than four or five dimensions, right?
My head is right.
But I think the way to describe this is what those models are doing is exploring that vast space, and they're trying to find what are global minimums to a problem. And it's very hard to find the global minimums. It's easy to accidentally find a local minimum. So let me just describe what that means. Imagine that you have a three-dimensional space. Imagine you've got a landscape in front of you with hills and valleys. And let's say, it's a finite marked off square of three-dimensional space. And the challenge is to find the lowest valley. Okay. And it's got a bunch of hills and valleys. You can imagine that some of them are lower than others. And you look over this thing, you're trying to figure out the lowest one. That's a three-dimensional space. And finding that lowest valley is an exploration mathematically for that global minimum. And of course, if you got stuck in another valley in a corner someplace, you might end up in a local minimum. And that's what these models can do. Okay. So as an example, when I was writing this book and I was finishing up, there is a concept in the book of the tragedy of the commons. Okay. And the tragedy of the commons is actually, there's a famous book about that subject. And so what I did is I asked ChatGPT, give me famous quotes about the tragedy of the commons. And it promptly gave me a list of a dozen. And I looked at the list and said, wow, there's this very profound thought by Mahatma Gandhi. Who knew? And so then I went back to Google search and I typed in Mahatma Gandhi, tragedy of the commons, etc. And I got a blank. So then I went back to ChatGPT and I said, did Mahatma Gandhi say this about the tragedy of the commons? And it very quickly answered, oh, no, he did, because the Tragedy of the Commons is a book that was written this year, and it was after Gandhi died. So it directly contradicted itself in the next question. So how did it get it so wrong in the first place? So again, this is an illustrative, maybe a little bit of a cartoon example, but it maybe gets to the point of how it could get it wrong. As it was, and I'll make up this cartoon answer because I can't look through 800 billion dimensions. But maybe it got stuck between quotes and famous people and the tragedy of the commons, and it was trying to find a place to bring them together.
Right. Tragedy of his death and the tragedy of the commons.
And so, it could be something like that. I mean, it's so many dimensions. Yeah. We can't answer that because it's a black box in that regard. It doesn't tell us how it got to that silly answer. They call it hallucinations in the field. What that just means is someone said it's a bullshit meter. It produces bullshit. Okay, it just does. And in a black box. But so that's the fundamental difference between a LLM and symbolic logic, is that this does not give you the right answer all the time, and because of all those dimensions, it's very hard to tell. And so the implications for that are, in my mind, is that it's going to be very difficult to make those into something similar to those, our expectations, which are, computers that work all the time.
Right. But you have a view of the future, and you've written about a view, you've created a view of leading up to that future. Is there anything else you'd like to tell us about your view of the future that... that maybe a particular thing that you explored in either Unfettered Journey or Journey to 2125.
So this book, I think, takes a very different tact than a lot of so-called futurists who I think sort of, again, utopian views technology moving, dramatically change your life overnight. And it'll be more difficult than that. And in fact, but what I also think is that technology will have an enormous impact on this next century. So if we think back 100 years, that was the 1920s. A little bit further than that, you get the Gilded Age. Did anyone watch the TV show The Gilded Age from the 1870s? I mean, between the 1870s and 1920s, I mean, we still had horse carts, right? It was very different. If you go forward 100 years, I think it's obvious it will be more different in 100 years because of the speed of technology. So that says that, our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren are going to have a lot more challenges to get through. So that's one of the reasons I wrote this book. Okay. In fact, here is a copy. I just got the hardbound copy recently. I'm very happy with the cover.
Nice. Great.
But let me read the epigraph, because I think, epigraphs are supposed to say something about what the book is about. And this says, of the many challenges ahead this century, a few matter. Focus on and overcome those few, and you, yours, and the world will survive and perhaps even thrive. And so what I'm trying to do with this book is to say, I think there's a short list of really important challenges. And we worry about lots of things, but I think there's a short list, and that's what's highlighted in this book. And so it's not just about technology. The reason for the subtitle, One Century, One Family, Rising to Challenges, is this book is parts family saga. It's parts political drama, and it's part hard science, speculative fiction. And what I tried to do in the book is to lay out, with real characters experiencing this future, what it will feel like to live through this. And through that, I explore what I think are the things that people have to get down to and just get done. They have to find solutions. They can't talk all the time about these problems. They actually have to solve some of them, because it's going to be coming at them faster and faster.
Yeah, it feels like a great moment. Let's just take a short pause. We're going to come back and get some questions about your characters and about the audiobook itself. Journey to 2125. One century, one family, rising to challenges. This is the story of a family facing our future. It's 2125 when a long-separated grandson suddenly arrives on his doorstep looking for answers. Max Macgyver retells their family story and secrets, revealing a century of challenges that they've faced. Journey to 2125 is one family's touching story across generations of adventure, rivalry, loss, survival, and resilience. This is the story of a family facing our future. A small boy escapes war in Asia. A young woman flees catastrophe driven by climate change in Africa. Some family members build technology companies, while others deal with the trauma of jobs lost to automation. A young couple fight for privacy and democracy. Lives are positively transformed by biomedical science and threatened by it. At its heart, Journey to 2125 is the story, told over a single day, of a young boy and his grandfather. Why did his parents decide to move to the commune? What family secrets will his grandfather share? Parts political drama, family saga, and hard science speculative fiction, Journey to 2125 is the story of how humankind might collectively weather the tragedy and chaos that we can expect from accelerating change. What will it feel like to live during these next 100 years? Take this journey with Max Macgyver and his grandson as they reveal their family history and the road ahead for you and yours. Get the full cast audiobook edition at amplifyaudiobooks.com. So, you've written some really interesting characters in Journey to 2125. Tell us about some of the decisions that you made in terms of like where people came, where your characters came from in the world geographically, and how you made, what some of your big decisions were about who these characters were going to be that were going to tell this story.
Okay. I'd love to talk about my characters. Well, remember that I started with another book that was already written, and now I have to fit this book so that because it's a prequel, it has to fit. So that's a very interesting constraint. And it was a fun challenge for me to write around. So the book is about a main character, Max Macgyver. Takes place in the year 2125. At that time, Max Macgyver is 100 years old. So he was born next year, 2025. And the story starts with Max's long-separated grandson showing up on his doorstep and wondering why his parents ran off to the commune. And so the book takes place over a single day as Max reveals the family secrets to his grandson. That's the structure. And so in that process, then we explore 3 generations of the family. And that covers from the time period 2033. And you see each group of the family members as they are experiencing the world as it exists then. And that is a mix of political challenges and economic challenges and social challenges and technological challenges, and all that coming together in I think a realistic way. And these characters are challenged by that future, and they have to do something about it. So how do they get through this very tough time? So that's the story.
Yeah, and so your characters, like some of them come from less developed countries, and some are coming from, more technologically advanced. So yeah, what were your decisions around that?
Yeah, well, so we have, we have a small boy escaping war in Africa. In Asia. We have a young woman fleeing from climate change in Africa. We have scenes in Saudi Arabia. Okay, we have scenes in Indonesia. We have scenes in Japan and Taiwan, and in the south of France, in Berlin, Germany. And of course in the United States, as we have because the world is very much tied together. It's very global today. Yes, everything is instantaneous. That will not change anytime soon. And importantly, the world is tied together in a very complex system. And so what happens in one place affects everything else. We have just had an election, and I think the people in Ukraine are wondering how that dramatically might affect their future, right? And the other part of it is, I think, important to think about is that there is a commons. There's a commons in terms of an information commons, because we have instantaneous information. And, at the moment, what happens is that there seems to be very little constraints on what information can go into that commons. Okay. Right. We have issues of free speech versus tainting the information commons. One might think that would be a challenge, one of the challenges in my book. So there's quite a bit of political drama. We have politicians in the story. We have folks who are building AI and robotics companies. And we have family members who are dealing with the impact of that on their own personal lives.
Right. And we have some with moral integrity and some without it.
It sounds like the real world, doesn't it?
Yeah, it sure does. And have you been to all the different places that are included in your
Actually, I have.
In your story?
I was in Saudi Arabia last year. I actually went to the city of Neom. It's on the drawing boards. We'll see if it becomes populated with 9 million people as the plan is. And you can see my thought in the book. I've certainly been to Japan several times. I've been to Indonesia, and Borneo, where the new city of Nusantara is actually being built as we speak, as they're moving the capital of Indonesia from Jakarta, which is sinking, to Borneo. Yeah, so I have been to basically all these places.
Wow. Wow, that's so cool. And then, so let's talk a little bit about the audiobook, and as at the time of this recording, we are, the project has been cast as a full cast project, and we're going to be starting production soon. So you haven't had a chance yet to listen to all of the, to the audiobook put together. But tell us a little bit about your experience so far in terms of the casting and the voices that you're hearing and sort of how that's coming together in your mind.
Well, I'm loving that because my first book, Unfettered Journey, and again, Pro Audio Voices helped us create all that. We had a single Shakespearean voice actor who was fabulous, did a great job. But this book, because we have, 3 generations of a family, we have a larger cast of characters. And what I really want to do is make it easy for the readers to keep track of everything. I mean, I have sometimes trouble with that. So, for example, in the book, when you're reading in written form, I have a family tree. And at the beginning of each chapter, or many of the chapters, I have a subpart of the family tree. And because some people have trouble with me when there are too many characters to remember who is who. And so we're dealing with that in terms of the audiobook. And one of the ways to do it is to have different voices for different characters in a much larger and expansive way than we've done before. So the folks, and we've got some great voice actors. I mean, I've listened to them all, and they're tremendous. So I think this will add a really nice element to the audiobook.
Yeah, and we will be able to help mitigate any confusion around where we are in time, since we do go back in time, to different stories of their family, be able to help that listener with some subtle cues as to where we are in time.
Yeah, I think it's important because here's a funny story. Some of my editors, I know a number of editors, great editors in this book, some of them looked at the stubs of family trees and says, "Oh, why do I need that? This is easy." And some of my other early readers said, "Oh my God, I really needed that because I got to keep all these characters in my head." So, I think there's different reading styles, and I think listening styles too. So, yeah, I think this will make it much easier to keep track of our characters. And they're fascinating characters. These chapters that go back through time. Well, starting in 2033, and we move through roughly every decade or so as we find out what's happening with their characters. These chapters are written by in the point of view of each of many of these characters. So you're getting multiple points of view in the book to see the story from different angles. Primarily, you're hearing the story through the voices of Max Macgyver and his grandson.
Yeah. So do you know the exact birth date of Max in 2025? Next year? Because I feel like that's we should celebrate it.
Well, it's probably in the spring.
Okay, well,
how's that?
I think you should pick a date. and we should maybe we have the book launch on that day or something.
That's great.
That's great. Yeah, it's really fun for us being able to, having worked on Unfettered Journey, to now be able to share this story and bring this to life in audio as well. Is there anything that sort of stands out to you in terms of the audiobook process, that you'd like to share with our listeners? Well,
I think it's don't try it yourself. I mean, there's still a lot of folks that might try to read their own audiobook. You won't do as good of a job. I mean, the voice actors out there, there's some fabulous voice actors. They've got great voices. They know how to do this. They do a fabulous job of adding just a certain emotional dimension to the story. That's what we like to hear. I think this book and the writing brings this level of emotional and engagement, but I think the actors will add to enhance that. And then I think probably most listeners probably have no idea how much work is in all of the process to set up to have the readings happen, all of the preparation of the script, and then all of the post-production work to make sure you have a very, very clean kind of audiobook. So both of those are really important parts of the process. So,
yeah, great. Thank you. And then would you let our listeners know where they can learn more about you and your writing and keep up with your projects?
Absolutely. Well, you can find Journey to 2125 everywhere you buy books. It's on all the regular places. It's around the world, available on Amazon and through Ingram. So available in your bookstores as well. And you can find me at garyfbengier.com. That's my author website. And there's lots of links there. And you can look at this and other books, and you can read about all the media coverage that's been going on. We've had great media coverage. And I should mention that Journey to 2125 is a Publishers Weekly editor's pick. So I was very pleased with that review, and we're getting tremendous reviews coming in from all the early readers. And now we've been out just a bit over a month, and so lots and lots of engagement. So
congratulations. That's awesome. And anything else that you can tell us about, once we get through the audiobook production process for this one, your aspirations with it going forward? Or any next books?
I'm just that is my last book. I think that is this is a 2-book set.
We'll see what your listeners and readers try to demand from you. We'll see.
No, but I'm enjoying getting the message out there. I think that these challenges of the century are an important message, and I really would like to have a conversation going on about these challenges and how we face them. And so that's what I'm going to be spending my time.
Beautiful. Gary, thank you so much for being with me. So Gary F. Bengier, author of Unfettered Journey and Journey to 2125. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for joining us for Audiobook Connection, behind the scenes with the creative teams. Please take a moment to subscribe at audiobookconnection.com. The podcast is sponsored by Pro Audio Voices, helping great stories come alive through audiobook production and marketing. Learn more at proaudiovoices.com. Again, thanks for being with us, and please join us next week.